Caleb arrived home earlier than usual, something he never did. He expected to find the house empty or, at most, the nanny quietly in her corner, as usual. However, upon entering the living room, what he saw made him stop abruptly. There, in the center of the room, Lucy was kneeling next to Jaden, both laughing and immersed in a simple game. But it wasn't that which captured Caleb's attention. His eyes were drawn to an old photograph that Lucy was holding. The face of the woman in the picture was a painful reminder that Caleb had buried long ago. His heart raced as he realized something he could never have imagined. In an instant, everything he believed to be true began to crumble. Lucy Oliveira always knew that life wasn't easy, but she wasn't prepared for what she would face in the Santos mansion. From the very first day, the environment was cold and impersonal, perfectly reflecting Caleb Santos's character. The millionaire, at 45 years old and with a posture that exuded authority, barely disguised his contempt for the young nanny. Every order was given with a cruel indifference. Each gesture from Caleb carried the intention to remind Lucy of her place. "Clean that properly, Lucy. Don't make me repeat myself," he would say, his tone always laced with an arrogance that made Lucy's stomach churn. But Lucy, at 25 years old, was strong. She had faced many hardships to get there, and her past had made her resilient. However, Caleb's treatment made her question her strength. Despite this, there was something, or rather someone, that made it all worthwhile. Jaden. Jaden, an 8-year-old boy, was a gentle soul trapped in a world that didn't seem to understand him. Caleb was an absent father, always engrossed in the business that had made him wealthy, leaving his son at the mercy of servants and tutors who viewed the boy more as a burden than a child. When Lucy arrived, Jaden was isolated, a child who avoided contact as if fearing that kindness was something temporary that could be taken away at any moment. With patience and empathy, Lucy began to break down the barriers surrounding Jaden's heart. Over time, he started to open up, finding in her the affection and attention his father never gave him. Lucy would read to him every night, teach him how to prepare simple snacks in the kitchen, and spend hours listening to his stories and fears. The bond between them grew stronger each day, and Jaden, once so withdrawn, began to smile again, something rare before Lucy's arrival. Caleb, even with his distant behavior, couldn't help but notice the change in his son. Jaden was happier, more confident. The boy, once so quiet, now asked questions and even tried, timidly, to converse with his father. Caleb was surprised, but his pride and coldness prevented him from acknowledging Lucy's positive influence. He continued to treat her with the same disdain, not realizing that each day Lucy was becoming an indispensable presence in Jaden's life, and in a way in his as well. Sometimes Caleb would watch Lucy and Jaden from a distance, feeling an unease he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the fear that by getting closer, he might lose something he didn't even know he had. The nights were especially lonely for Lucy. After Jaden fell asleep, she would find herself alone in the grand house, lost in her own thoughts. The Santos mansion, despite its opulence, was a place of shadows and silences, where the echo of footsteps seemed to amplify the solitude. Lucy felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she clung to the fact that she was making a difference in Jaden's life. That was what kept her strong. One morning, while tidying up Caleb's room, Lucy stumbled upon an envelope that had fallen among the papers on his desk. The name written in an old hand caught her attention. Lucy hesitated, but curiosity was stronger. She picked up the envelope, sliding her fingers over the yellowed paper, feeling that this was more than just ordinary correspondence. Upon opening the envelope, Lucy found documents that, at first glance, made no sense. There were photos, letters, and an old contract, all referring to a distant time. Her eyes widened as she read the first lines of one of the papers, mentions of shady businesses, illegal transactions, and names she had never heard before. Her blood ran cold as she realized she was holding proof of something much larger and more dangerous than she could imagine. She quickly put the documents back in the envelope, her heart racing. She knew she had to be careful. She was dealing with a secret that could put her life at risk. With every step she took inside that mansion, Lucy felt like she was walking on a tightrope, where any misstep could be fatal. The following days were marked by a growing tension. Lucy tried to act normally, but the fear of Caleb discovering what she knew consumed her from within. Even so, she continued her work, caring for Jaden with the same dedication, although the weight of the secret was always present in her mind. Caleb, for his part, began to notice a change in Lucy. Something in the way she avoided him, in the way her eyes darted away from his, sparked a suspicion he couldn't explain. It was clear that she was hiding something, but what? Caleb didn't know, but he felt he needed to find out before it was too late. Meanwhile, the bond between Lucy and Jaden continued to grow. The boy, oblivious to the secrets surrounding the adults, only wished that those moments with Lucy would never end. To him, she was more than just a babysitter. She was the mother figure he had always dreamed of having. Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The documents she had found in Caleb's office haunted her. Every night while Jaden slept peacefully, she wondered what she would do with the information she now possessed. The mansion, which had once seemed just a cold and lonely place, had now transformed into a trap, where every shadow seemed to hide a danger. She thought about leaving everything behind, but Jaden kept her there. The boy relied on her. He depended on her. Lucy knew that if she left, he would be completely alone in that world of cold walls and oppressive silences. One day, while they were playing in the garden, Lucy watched Jaden run between the trees. His smile was like a ray of sunshine amidst the storm of emotions consuming her. She knew she needed to protect him, but with each passing day, she felt more afraid that something or someone could destroy them. Her mind was so lost in these thoughts that she almost didn't notice when Jaden tripped and fell. When she looked at the boy, she saw him writhing in pain, holding his arm in an odd way. Lucy rushed to him, trying not to panic. Jaden's arm was visibly broken, the bone forming a frightening bulge under the skin. Without hesitation, Lucy scooped the boy into her arms and ran inside the house, screaming for help. At the hospital, while waiting for news from the doctor, Lucy couldn't stop blaming herself. How had she let this happen? Jaden, despite the pain, held her hand tightly, as if seeking in her the strength he himself lacked at that moment. His eyes were filled with tears, but he was trying to be brave. "I'm so sorry, Jaden," she whispered, her voice choked. "I never wanted you to get hurt." "It wasn't your fault, Lucy," he replied with a maturity that made her swallow hard. "You always take care of me. It just happened. It wasn't your fault." Those words touched Lucy in a way she hadn't expected. The pain she felt in her chest was not only from seeing Jaden injured, but from the overwhelming responsibility she carried. She was all Jaden had, and if she failed him, like now? Caleb arrived at the hospital shortly after. Seeing Jaden with his arm in a cast and Lucy by the bedside, his eyes narrowed, anger evident on his face. He didn't say anything immediately, but the silence between them was deafening. "I leave for a few hours and this happens," Caleb finally said, his voice low but laden with disappointment. Lucy opened her mouth to defend herself but couldn't find the words. Exhaustion and guilt consumed her. Caleb, sensing Lucy's vulnerability, seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if on the verge of saying something different, but his pride held him back. "Let's go home," he said coldly, picking up Jaden, even though the boy was more comfortable in the hospital bed. Lucy followed the two, feeling smaller with each step. That night, while helping Jaden settle into bed, Lucy noticed something different about Caleb. He was quieter than usual, watching her movements with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When Jaden finally fell asleep, Caleb called Lucy for a talk. In the office, Caleb sat behind the large mahogany desk, staring at Lucy with an unreadable expression. She stood, her hands clasped in front of her body, trying to hide her nervousness. "What's going on with you?" he asked bluntly. "You're acting strange, like you're afraid of something." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. Caleb was more perceptive than she had imagined. But how could she confess that she had discovered his secrets? And more importantly, how could she protect Jaden if Caleb decided to turn against her? "I'm just worried about Jaden," she lied, trying to sound convincing. "He's such a good boy, and I want to make sure he's happy and safe." Caleb seemed to consider his response for a moment, but then his eyes narrowed, as if he were trying to see through the facade Lucy had erected. She knew he didn't completely believe her, but for some reason, he decided not to press her further. "You should rest," he finally said, his voice a bit softer but still laden with distrust. "Jaden needs you in top shape." Lucy nodded and left the office, her heart pounding. She knew that this conversation was far from over. Caleb suspected something, and that meant her time was running out. With each passing day, the tension between them grew, like a rope that could snap at any moment. The following days passed in a tense rhythm. Lucy continued to care for Jaden with all the love she could muster, but she couldn't ignore the shadow that loomed over the house. Caleb was more present than ever, as if he wanted to control her every movement. Lucy felt his eyes on her all the time, a constant presence that left her on the brink of collapse. Then one day, Caleb did something unexpected. He came home early, a completely out-of-character move. Lucy was in Jaden's room, reading a story to him, when she heard Caleb's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Her whole body tensed. When he entered the room, his eyes went straight to her, and something in his gaze was different. Caleb said nothing, just observed the scene for a moment. Jaden, oblivious to the tension, smiled at his father, holding up the book Lucy was reading. "Look, Daddy, Lucy is telling me a story." But Caleb barely seemed to hear. His gaze was fixed on Lucy, as if he were trying to decipher something he couldn't quite understand. The intensity of that look made her swallow hard, but she tried to stay calm, focusing on Jaden's smile. "Is everything okay, Lucy?" Caleb asked, his voice surprisingly gentle but laden with something she couldn't identify. "Yes, sir. I was just reading to Jaden before he goes to sleep." Caleb nodded, but he didn't leave the room immediately. Instead, he approached Jaden's bed and bent down to look his son in the eyes. Lucy watched, her heart racing, feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. And then Caleb saw what was on the dresser next to the bed. The old portrait, the one Lucy had left there by mistake after cleaning it. Upon seeing the photo, Caleb froze. His face went pale, and he picked up the portrait with trembling hands. Lucy couldn't see exactly what was in the photo, but the impact it had on Caleb was undeniable. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice now cold and hard, a terrible contrast to the softness from before. Lucy felt panic rising within her. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain? What was happening? But before she could think of a response, Caleb abruptly stood up and left the room, taking the portrait with him. The silence that followed was deafening. Jaden, sensing the tension, looked at Lucy with wide, worried eyes. "What happened, Lucy? Is Daddy mad?" Lucy smiled at him, but it was a forced smile, full of fear. "It's okay, Jaden. Just go to sleep, all right? I'm here with you." Jaden nodded, but Lucy knew he wasn't convinced. As soon as the boy fell asleep, she got up and went to the hallway, where she saw Caleb standing in front of the office, the portrait still in his hands. He seemed to be in an internal struggle, something Lucy couldn't fully understand, but that terrified her. Caleb entered the office and closed the door behind him, leaving Lucy in the hallway, alone with her chaotic thoughts. What did that portrait mean? And why was Caleb so shaken by something that, at first glance, seemed so harmless? Lucy knew that the truth was about to come to light, and she feared what that could mean for her and for Jaden. But more than that, she feared Caleb's reaction, a man who had always kept his emotions locked away, but who now seemed on the verge of losing control. The pieces were falling into place in an alarming way, and Lucy felt that somehow she was at the center of something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. And deep down, she knew there was no turning back. Lucy spent the night awake, trying to understand what that portrait represented. Something had changed in the way Caleb looked at her, and the intensity of that gaze wouldn't leave her mind. He didn't bring up the photo again, or what had disturbed him so much, but Lucy felt that the situation was far from resolved. The next day, while preparing breakfast for Jaden, Caleb showed up in the kitchen. It was unusual to see him there at that hour. He typically isolated himself in his office, away from the morning chaos. Lucy kept her head down, focused on cutting the fruits, but she could feel his eyes fixed on her back. "Lucy, I need you to come to the office now," he said, without preamble. She nodded, trying to control the anxiety that was eating her inside. She knew she couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. Jaden, who was already at the table, watched his father and the nanny with curiosity, sensing that something was different in the air. Lucy gently touched the boy's shoulder before following Caleb. In the office, Caleb closed the door behind her. The portrait was on the table, exactly where he had left it the night before. The silence between them was heavy, each second increasing the tension. "I want you to tell me, Lucy, where did this come from?" he began, pointing at the portrait. His voice was controlled, but Lucy could sense the effort he was making to stay calm. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I found it while cleaning, in the middle of the papers in your office. I thought it was just an old photo. I didn't know it held such importance." Caleb took a deep breath, as if trying to contain something much deeper than mere anger. "Do you have any idea who this woman in the photo is?" He lifted the portrait, bringing it closer to Lucy, forcing her to face the image. Lucy looked at the photo more closely this time. It was a young woman with long dark hair, large expressive eyes. There was something strangely familiar about her, but Lucy couldn't identify what. "I don't know, sir. Who is she?" Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were battling an avalanche of painful memories. When he opened them again, Lucy saw something she had never seen in him before. Vulnerability. "Her name was Isabella," he began, his voice softer, almost a whisper. "She was the only woman I ever truly loved. I was a different man back then, but due to circumstances beyond my control, we separated. She was pregnant when I left her, and I never heard from her again, nor about the child." Lucy felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Caleb's words penetrated deep, unleashing a sense of panic she couldn't explain. The woman's face in the photo seemed even more familiar now, and a terrible premonition began to form in her mind. "I spent years trying to forget, but I never could. The guilt consumed me for so long that I shut myself off from the world, focused only on business. Until you showed up here, Lucy. And yesterday, when I saw you with Jaden holding that photo, I couldn't deny what was in front of me any longer." Lucy could barely breathe. She felt her heart racing so fast, it seemed like it would burst from her chest. Confusion and fear swirled in her mind, creating a whirlwind of emotions that left her paralyzed. Caleb moved closer to her, his eyes now fixed on hers, desperately searching for answers. "Lucy, who were your parents? Where were you born?" She swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she replied. "I don't know. I was raised in an orphanage. I don't have much information about my parents. All I know is that my mother left me there when I was a baby. I never knew her." Caleb closed his eyes again, as if absorbing a mortal blow. He stepped back, walking to the window and looking out at the horizon in silence. What Lucy couldn't understand was that, in that moment, Caleb was processing something that would change everything. He began to mentally calculate, connecting dates and facts he had always avoided facing. "The name of the orphanage," he said without turning, his voice now hoarse. "Do you remember it?" "It was Hope Orphanage in New York." The name fell like a bomb in the office. Caleb clenched his fists, his body trembling with an emotion Lucy couldn't decipher. Finally, he turned slowly, his face pale, but his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her recoil. "Lucy, I'm going to find out the truth. If there's any chance that you are my daughter, I need to know." The words echoed in the room, leaving Lucy breathless. She had never considered this possibility, but now everything seemed to make sense. The reason Caleb had been so affected by the photo, his sudden interest in her, the weight of the past he carried, everything pointed to a truth Lucy had never imagined. Caleb, determined and tormented, left the office, leaving Lucy alone with her chaotic thoughts. She collapsed into the chair, feeling that the world around her was spinning out of control. What would she do now? How could she continue in that house knowing what she knew? And more than that, how could she face the possibility that Caleb might be her father? Lucy spent the rest of the day in a state of numbness, moving mechanically through her tasks, but her mind was completely absorbed by what she had discovered. When Jaden tried to talk to her, Lucy responded with a forced smile, trying to hide the chaos unfolding inside her. That night, Caleb stayed in the office for hours, rummaging through old papers, making phone calls, trying to piece together the puzzle that his heart refused to accept. The possibility of Lucy being his long-lost daughter was as devastating as it was redemptive. He didn't know how to cope with the guilt that was starting to resurface, or with the hope that threatened to shatter him completely. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, Caleb found what he was looking for: a name, a date, a clue that led him to believe that Lucy really could be his daughter. He knew that the following day he would have to confront her with this discovery, but he feared her reaction, feared what it would mean for both of them. The next morning, Lucy was in the living room with Jaden, helping him with a school project when Caleb walked in. He seemed different, more resolute, yet at the same time more vulnerable than ever. Lucy knew that the conversation from the night before still hung over them, but she was far from imagining what was to come. "Lucy," he began straightforwardly, "we need to talk. I found some things that confirm what I feared." She felt a knot in her throat but nodded, knowing she couldn't escape this conversation. "Jaden, why don't you go finish this in your room? I'll be up there to help you in a minute." The boy, sensing the seriousness in Lucy's tone, left the room reluctantly, leaving them alone. Caleb waited until he was out of sight before continuing. "Lucy, I made some calls yesterday. I found out that when Isabella left me, she was indeed in New York, and the Hope Orphanage was where she left you. Everything fits. You are my daughter." Lucy stood frozen, his words sounding distant, as if they couldn't possibly be real. She knew something big was about to be revealed, but hearing that, like that, so directly, was like a blow that left her breathless. This can't be true," she stammered, her mind unable to process what was happening. "I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is all here," he said, handing her the documents he had gathered. Lucy took the papers with trembling hands, looking at them without really seeing them. "I've spent my whole life trying to bury the past, trying to be someone who would never have to face these truths. But now they are right here, before us. And I don't know how to apologize for everything I've done, for the man I've become, for abandoning you." Lucy felt tears welling in her eyes, but fought to keep them under control. "I don't know what to say. I don't know how to process this. Has my whole life been a lie?" "No, Lucy. You were strong. You survived everything. But now we have the chance to start over, to build something new, to make peace with the past. But Lucy wasn't ready for that. All she wanted was to run away, to escape from all that pain, from the revelation that had turned her life upside down. She stood up abruptly, pushing the papers back toward Caleb. I can't deal with this right now," she said, her voice choked with the sobs she was struggling to hold back. "I need some time to think, to understand what all this means." Caleb nodded, understanding that he too would need time to process everything. But there was something inside him that feared losing Lucy again now that he had found her. He wanted to hold her, to make sure she would stay there, but he knew that pressure would only push her away further. Lucy left the room almost running, her heart racing. She passed right by Jaden's room, unable to look at him. She needed air, space to think, to understand what was happening in her life. She stepped out into the garden, where the cool wind brushed against her face, bringing a little relief to the storm of emotions consuming her. But nothing could dissipate the turmoil within her. How could she continue in that house, knowing who Caleb was? And more than that, how could she deal with the reality that he was her father? Questions swirled in her mind, but no answer seemed right. Lucy knew she was at a crossroads, and that any choice she made would change her life forever. And in that moment, all she could do was cry, feeling more lost and alone than ever. Caleb spent the following days in a state of unrest that he could barely hide. Since the revelation that Lucy was his daughter, his mind had been in constant conflict. He knew he had made unforgivable mistakes that were now demanding their price. But the truth was that he didn't know how to redeem himself, how to regain his daughter's trust, whom he had never known, and more importantly, how to deal with the weight of guilt for having abandoned her. Lucy, on the other hand, was farther away than ever. She avoided Caleb at all costs, immersing herself in daily tasks as a way to escape the thoughts that haunted her. Her mind was a chaos, and she felt as if she was on the brink of a breakdown. The house, which once felt like a refuge, had now become an emotional prison. Jaden, always sensitive, sensed the growing tension but couldn't fully understand what was happening. He only knew that Lucy, the person he trusted most, was sad, and that his father, always so distant, now seemed tormented by something he couldn't comprehend. One night, after yet another difficult day, Caleb decided he could no longer delay. He needed to try, in some way, to fix things, or at least begin to try. So he organized a family dinner, a simple event, but one he hoped would be the first step toward rebuilding their relationship. Lucy was taken by surprise when Caleb called her for dinner. She almost refused, but something in his voice made her reconsider. Maybe it was the weight of the guilt he carried, or perhaps the fact that, despite everything, she too needed answers. Either way, she agreed to go. The dinner started in silence. Caleb was visibly uncomfortable but determined. Jaden, sensing the tension, tried to break the ice with his childhood stories, but his voice echoed in the room like a painful reminder that this family was shattered. "Lucy," Caleb began, setting down his utensils and looking directly at her. "I know you have every right to hate me for what happened. I hate myself for what I did, for being so blind and selfish. But I need you to understand that I never wanted things to be this way." Lucy kept her eyes on her plate, avoiding his gaze. Caleb's words were sincere, but that didn't lessen the pain she felt. "I spent years of my life building a wall around myself, thinking I could protect myself from the world, from the pain of losing Isabella, from the guilt of abandoning you. But now, that wall has crumbled, and all that's left is the truth. I know it's asking a lot, but I need a chance to show you that I can be a father, that I can do things right this time." She finally lifted her eyes to meet his. Caleb's eyes were filled with a pain and vulnerability she had never seen before. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that he could change, but the other part was so hurt that any sign of hope felt like a dangerous risk. "And how do you expect me to believe you now after everything?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. "You spent years despising me, humiliating me, and now you expect me to just forget?" Caleb nodded, swallowing hard. "No, I don't expect you to forget. I don't even expect you to forgive me. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can be different, that I can be better for you and for Jaden." The mention of Jaden was what broke Lucy's resistance. She looked at the boy, who was sitting silently, watching the exchange between the two adults with a worried expression. He was innocent in all of this, and deserved more than to be caught in a conflict he didn't cause. Lucy sighed deeply, feeling the weight of Caleb's words and the responsibility she carried not just for herself, but also for Jaden. "I don't know how to deal with this, Caleb. I never knew what it was like to have a family, and now it all feels so confusing." Caleb nodded again, understanding that the wounds he had caused wouldn't heal overnight, but he was willing to try, even if it meant starting from scratch. "Let's do this together, Lucy. It doesn't have to happen all at once. We can take it one step at a time, figure out what works, how we can be a family." Lucy remained silent for a long moment, but finally she gave a slight nod. "I don't promise anything, Caleb. I just need time. I understand, and I will respect that. I just want you to know that I'll be here, willing to do whatever it takes." The conversation ended with a sense of uncertainty, but also with a small glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, there was a possibility, however remote, of reconciliation. In the days that followed, Caleb began to change. He made a point to spend more time with Jaden, taking him on outings to the park and helping him with schoolwork. Lucy observed these changes from a distance, not getting too involved, but noticing that maybe, just maybe, Caleb was indeed trying to be a better man. Caleb also made an effort to be present for Lucy, albeit in a subtle way. He didn't want to pressure her, but he made it a point to show that he was there, available for when she was ready. With each gesture, each small change, he hoped to regain a little more of the trust he had lost. One afternoon, Lucy was in the garden, tending to the flowers that Jaden had planted when Caleb approached her. He watched her for a few minutes before speaking, admiring the serenity she exuded amidst nature. "Jaden told me these flowers are your favorites," he commented, breaking the silence. Lucy smiled faintly, without taking her eyes off the plants. "They are. My mom loved them too." Caleb sat down beside her, unsure of how to continue the conversation. But Lucy surprisingly spoke first. "You're really trying, aren't you?" He looked at her, realizing how much that question meant. "Yes, I am, and I will keep trying because you and Jaden are all I have now." She finally turned to look at him, and for the first time, Caleb saw a small opening in the wall she had built. "I still have a lot of questions, Caleb. About my mom, about what happened between you two, and about why you never tried to find me." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of those questions. "And you have every right to ask. When you're ready, I will tell you everything, without hiding anything. You deserve to know the truth." Lucy nodded, accepting the answer for now. "I won't lie, Caleb. I'm still hurt, and I don't know how long it will take for me to trust you. But at least, I'm willing to try." Those words, simple but powerful, were all Caleb needed to hear. There was much work to be done, many wounds to heal, but for the first time, he felt there was a real chance for redemption. As time passed, the dynamic in the Santos household changed. Lucy and Caleb still had a lot to resolve, but there was a new energy between them, a mutual willingness to try to make things work. Jaden, who had previously felt lost in the middle of the conflict, was now starting to see signs that his family could indeed become something real, something he had always dreamed of having. Until one day, Caleb decided it was time to reveal the whole truth to Jaden. He knew the boy had the right to know what was happening, to understand the changes taking place around him. After dinner, he called Lucy and Jaden to sit in the living room. The boy, who until then seemed oblivious to what was happening between the adults, now looked at his father with intense curiosity. "Jaden, we need to talk about something important," Caleb began, his voice firm but gentle. "There are things you need to know about me, about Lucy, and about us as a family." Jaden frowned, confused. "What do you mean, Dad?" Caleb exchanged a quick glance with Lucy, who nodded slightly, giving him the strength he needed to continue. "Lucy isn't just your babysitter, Jaden. She's more than that. In fact, she is your sister." The silence that followed was profound as Jaden processed the words. His eyes widened and he looked at Lucy for confirmation. "Lucy, is it true? You're my sister?" Lucy felt a tightness in her heart, but she smiled tenderly at Jaden. "Yes, Jaden. We discovered that recently. I am your sister, and that means we are a family now, for real." The boy remained silent for a few moments, trying to understand what this meant. Then finally he smiled, a pure and relieved smile. "So, you're going to stay here forever, Lucy?" Lucy felt tears welling up in her eyes, but smiled back. "Yes, Jaden. I'm going to stay here with you. We are a family now, and I will be by your side." Caleb watched the scene, feeling a mix of emotions he could barely describe. He had made many mistakes, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance to make things right. The family dinner had sealed a new phase in the Santoses' lives. It wasn't the end of their problems, but it was a beginning that Caleb and Lucy were willing to build together, one step at a time. And so, as Jaden laughed and hugged Lucy, Caleb felt that for the first time in many years, there was real hope. The hope that, despite the past, they could find a future together as a family. We hope you enjoyed this narrative. Please leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more touching stories that resonate with the soul. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think, and feedback is always welcome. See you in the next emotional video. Until then.